The first time anyone noticed Daniel Mercer, it was because he didn't move when the siren passed. Most people in Alder Ridge stopped what they were doing when the volunteer fire truck roared through Main Street. Heads turned, conversations paused, but Daniel kept tightening the rusted bolt on the back of an old pickup truck, his hands steady, eyes fixed on the metal as if noise belonged to another world. The mechanic shop smelled of oil, rain, and cedarwood drifting from the hills beyond town. A wooden radio played low country music near the door. The owner, Hank Lowell, wiped his hands on a rag and glanced toward Daniel. "You ever hear anything?" Hank asked. Daniel shrugged slightly. "Enough." It was the longest answer he gave that morning. Alder Ridge wasn't a place where strangers stayed strangers for long. By the second week, everyone knew he rented the small grey house near the lake, the one with the porch light always on, even during the day. By the third week, they decided he was either hiding from something or trying to forget it. He never corrected them. At noon, a boy around 10 years old wandered into the shop holding a bicycle with a bent chain, freckles across his nose, dirt on his sneakers. Daniel stepped forward before Hank could say anything. "Leave it here," Daniel told him quietly. The boy hesitated. "How much?" Daniel turned the bike upside down and began working without looking up. "Just come back tomorrow." The kid watched in silence for a moment. "My dad says you were in the army." Daniel's hands paused for half a second, then continued moving. "Your dad talks too much," he said. The boy laughed, unsure if it was a joke, and left the shop. Outside, the sky hung low and grey over the mountains. Wind carried the scent of rain across the empty road. Daniel stepped out for air, leaning against the side of the building. Across the street, an elderly woman struggled with grocery bags. Before anyone else noticed, he crossed over and lifted them gently from her hands. "You don't have to," she said. "I know," he replied. She studied his face as they walked. "You're Mercer, right? Lived here when you were a kid?" Daniel nodded once. "Your father used to fish at the lake every Sunday," she continued. "Good man." He didn't answer. The silence between them felt heavier than the bags he carried. Back at the shop, Hank watched him through the window. "You know," he said later, "people around here like to understand who they're working beside." Daniel closed the toolbox carefully. "Understanding isn't always necessary." Hank shook his head, half amused. "You're not going to tell me anything about yourself, are you?" "No." The honesty made Hank laugh, but there was respect in it too. That evening, Daniel walked home along the gravel road that curved around the lake. The water lay still, reflecting a sky turning slowly violet. A dog barked somewhere in the distance. Lights flickered on inside small houses, one by one, like quiet signals of normal lives continuing without him. His porch creaked under his boots. Inside, the house was sparse. A table, 2 chairs, a shelf of old paperbacks, and a metal box resting near the window. Daniel set his keys down and stood there for a long moment, listening to the silence. No television, no music, just wind brushing against the siding. He opened the metal box. Inside lay a folded uniform, a worn photograph of 3 men standing in desert light, and a small silver medal wrapped in cloth. Daniel stared at it, but didn't touch it. Instead, he closed the lid gently, as if the past needed to stay contained. A truck drove by outside, backfiring loudly. Daniel's shoulders tensed instantly, breath shallow, eyes scanning the room before he caught himself. He exhaled slowly, pressing a hand against the table until the tension faded. Night settled over Alder Ridge. Later, a knock came at the door. Daniel hesitated before opening it. The town's sheriff stood on the porch, hat tucked under one arm, expression polite but curious. "Evening, Mercer," he said. "Mind if I ask you a few questions?" Daniel leaned against the frame. "Depends what they're about." The sheriff glanced toward the lake, then back at him. "Someone's been asking about you. Not from around here." A quiet stillness passed between them. Daniel didn't look surprised, only tired. "What did you tell them?" he asked. "Nothing," the sheriff replied. "Figured you might want to handle it yourself." Daniel nodded once. "I appreciate that." The sheriff hesitated before leaving. "People here don't judge easily. But they do notice things. Just don't stay invisible forever. After he drove away, Daniel remained on the porch, staring into the dark water beyond the trees. A faint reflection of himself stared back, a man who had returned home but never truly arrived. And somewhere deep inside, a memory he kept buried shifted slightly, as if Alder Ridge was beginning to pull the truth out of him, one quiet moment at a time. Morning in Alder Ridge arrived slowly, wrapped in mist that hovered above the lake like a secret not ready to be told. Daniel was already awake before the sun touched the rooftops. Coffee brewed quietly in the small kitchen while he stood at the window, watching the empty road, as if expecting something or someone to appear. He slept lightly, always had. The mechanic shop opened at 7, though Daniel arrived earlier to sweep the floor and check the tools. Routine kept his thoughts ordered, predictable movements, measured silence. Hank noticed it, but didn't mention it. In a town like theirs, respect often looked like leaving a man alone. By mid-morning, a pickup truck rolled into the lot, tires crunching over gravel. A woman stepped out, early 40s, sharp posture, city clothes that didn't belong to Alder Ridge. She scanned the building before walking inside. "You Mercer?" she asked. Daniel wiped his hands on a rag. "Depends who's asking." She studied him closely, as if comparing his face to a memory. "Name's Claire Donovan," she said, pulling out a badge quickly before tucking it back into her jacket. "I'm not here officially, just trying to understand something." Hank cleared his throat from across the room. "We fixing cars today or running interviews?" Claire ignored him, eyes still on Daniel. "You left the service almost 8 years ago. Records after that go quiet. That's unusual." Daniel turned back to the engine he was working on. "People leave." She stepped closer. "Some people don't disappear from every file unless they want to." The tension in the room shifted, subtle but real. Daniel tightened a bolt slowly, then closed the hood with a soft, metallic click. "What do you want?" he asked. "A conversation," she replied. He shook his head once. "Not interested." Claire held his gaze for a moment longer, then exhaled quietly. "If you change your mind, I'll be at the diner." She turned and left, the bell above the door ringing softly behind her. Hank watched Daniel carefully. "Friend of yours?" "No." "You sure?" Daniel didn't answer. The rest of the day passed in small, ordinary moments, fixing a loose brake line, adjusting an old engine, handing the repaired bicycle back to the freckled boy who smiled like he'd been given something priceless. But beneath every action ran a quiet current of tension, like a storm waiting beyond the horizon. That evening, Daniel walked toward the lake instead of going straight home. The path curved through tall grass and old pine trees that whispered when the wind moved through them. He sat on a worn wooden bench near the water, staring at the reflection of the mountains. Footsteps approached from behind. The boy from earlier, Ethan, stopped a few feet away, holding the bike Daniel had fixed. "It rides perfect now," he said. Daniel nodded. "My mom says you used to live here before," Ethan continued. "Why'd you come back?" Daniel watched the ripples spreading across the water. "Sometimes you return to the place where things make sense." Ethan tilted his head. "Does it make sense now?" Daniel thought about the question longer than expected. "Not yet." The kid sat beside him without asking, feet swinging above the grass. They watched the sunset quietly, orange light sliding across the lake like a fading memory. "You don't talk much," Ethan said. "Talking isn't always necessary." "My dad says quiet people notice everything." Daniel almost smiled. A truck engine echoed from the road nearby, loud, sudden. Daniel's posture stiffened before he relaxed again, masking the reaction quickly. Ethan noticed but didn't ask. When the boy left, Daniel remained alone by the water until the sky turned dark blue. He walked home slower than usual, aware of headlights following at a distance before turning away toward town. Inside his house, he sat at the table and opened the metal box again. This time, he picked up the photograph. 3 soldiers standing shoulder to shoulder under harsh sunlight. One of them was Daniel, younger, eyes sharper. Another man's face had been lightly scratched, as if someone had tried to erase him from the moment. Daniel traced the edge of the photo. A knock sounded at the door again. Claire Donovan stood outside, arms crossed against the cold night air. "You're hard to catch," she said. "I didn't invite you," Daniel replied calmly. "I know," she admitted, "but I found something that belongs to you." She handed him a thin envelope. Military seal, unopened. He stared at it without taking it. "It's been rerouted 3 times, she continued. "Looks like someone wanted to make sure it reached you eventually." Daniel finally accepted the envelope, feeling its weight, as if it held more than paper. "What's in it?" he asked. "I didn't open it," she said softly. "But I think you already know." Silence stretched between them. Claire's voice lowered. "Someone from your old unit is asking questions too, not friendly ones." Daniel's jaw tightened slightly, the first visible crack in his calm. "I'm not part of that life anymore," he said. "Maybe," she replied, "but it might not be done with you." After she left, Daniel stood in the doorway for a long time, staring at the envelope. The night air carried distant thunder from beyond the mountains. He closed the door, sat at the table, and turned the envelope over in his hands. His name was written in careful, familiar handwriting. For the first time since returning to Alder Ridge, hesitation showed clearly on his face, and somewhere deep inside, the quiet life he had built began to feel less like refuge and more like the calm before something unavoidable. Daniel didn't open the envelope that night. It remained on the table beside the cold coffee mug while he sat in silence, listening to the ticking of the wall clock. Outside, wind brushed against the siding of the house, carrying the faint echo of distant thunder rolling across the mountains. He had learned long ago that some pieces of paper weighed more than weapons. Morning came grey and slow. At the mechanic shop, Hank noticed the difference immediately, not in Daniel's movements, which stayed precise, but in the way his eyes lingered on the road every few minutes. "You expecting trouble?" Hank asked casually, pretending to sort tools. Daniel tightened a lug nut. "Trouble usually doesn't announce itself." Hank nodded, as if that answer told him more than enough. Around noon, Claire Donovan returned to the shop, this time without hesitation. She leaned against the counter while Daniel finished working on a customer's truck. "You're not curious what's inside that envelope?" she asked. "I know what it is," he said quietly. And curiosity doesn't change facts." She studied him for a long moment. "You're not the only one who thinks something is coming," she said. "A name popped up in a regional report last night, someone tied to your old unit. He's been asking about Alder Ridge." Daniel's hands paused for a fraction of a second. "What's the name?" he asked. Claire hesitated. "Cole Bennett." The sound of it hung in the air like a memory refusing to stay buried. Daniel closed the toolbox slowly. His expression didn't break, but the silence around him grew heavier. Hank glanced between them. "You two going to stand there speaking in riddles all day?" Claire ignored him. "I read enough to know you were involved in something classified, something that ended badly." Daniel wiped grease from his hands. "People read many things, and sometimes they don't understand them," she said gently. Outside, a black pickup slowed as it passed the shop, engine rumbling deeper than most vehicles in town. Daniel watched it through the window without turning his head fully. The driver didn't stop, just drove on, disappearing toward the lake road. Claire noticed the shift in his posture. "Friend of yours?" "No." "Enemy?" Daniel didn't answer. That evening, the town gathered at the small community field for a local fundraiser. Food stands, music, children running across the grass. Hank insisted Daniel come along, claiming he needed to look like part of civilization once in a while. Daniel stood near the edge of the crowd, hands in his pockets, watching rather than participating. Ethan ran past with a group of kids, waving when he saw him. "You came," the boy said, breathless. Daniel nodded. A loud pop echoed from somewhere behind the stage, a firework misfiring. Most people laughed. Daniel's body reacted before his mind caught up. Shoulders tight, eyes scanning exits, breath quickening for a split second before he forced himself still again. Claire watched from a distance, noticing everything. She approached slowly. "You don't have to keep pretending nothing affects you," she said. "I'm not pretending," Daniel replied. "Then what are you doing?" He looked toward the lake beyond the field, lights reflecting on the dark water. Waiting. For what? He hesitated, then answered honestly. For the past to decide if it's finished with me. Music played louder as the sky turned deep blue. People laughed. Someone handed Daniel a paper plate with food he barely touched. Across the field, a man stood near a parked truck, watching him. Tall, broad-shouldered, face half hidden under a cap. The moment lasted only seconds before the stranger turned away and disappeared into the crowd. Daniel felt it, that quiet instinct that had once kept him alive. Claire followed his gaze. You know him. Daniel shook his head slowly, but the tension in his jaw said otherwise. Later that night, back at his house, he finally opened the envelope. Inside was a single letter and a small metallic tag, the kind soldiers wore around their necks. The handwriting was unmistakable. If this reaches you, it means the truth didn't stay buried. Daniel closed his eyes briefly, memories pressing forward, heat, dust, voices over a radio, a choice that couldn't be undone. A second knock sounded at the door. Not Claire this time. Daniel opened it to find the sheriff standing under the porch light, expression more serious than before. We've got a situation, he said quietly. Strange vehicle parked near the lake road. Plates don't match any local registry. Daniel nodded once, already pulling on his jacket. The sheriff hesitated. You know something about this, don't you? Daniel looked toward the dark water beyond the trees. Maybe. They walked down the steps together, night air sharp against their skin. Somewhere in the distance, an engine idled softly, patient, waiting. For years, Daniel had built a life based on quiet routines and small acts no one noticed. But as he stepped onto the gravel road, the past felt closer than it had since the day he left the service. And for the first time since returning to Alder Ridge, he didn't walk away from it. The lake road stretched ahead in a thin ribbon of pale gravel, illuminated only by the sheriff's headlights and the distant glow of Alder Ridge behind them. Daniel walked slightly ahead, posture calm but alert, every movement measured as if guided by instincts he never fully left behind. They spotted the truck before they reached the bend. Black, engine running, windows tinted dark enough to hide whoever sat inside. The sheriff slowed. You want to tell me what I'm walking into? Daniel's eyes stayed on the vehicle. Someone looking for answers. That doesn't sound comforting. It isn't. The driver's door opened slowly. A man stepped out, tall, heavy boots pressing into the gravel. The porch light from a nearby cabin caught his face just enough for recognition to flicker across Daniel's expression. Cole Bennett, older now, harder around the eyes, but unmistakable. Long time, Mercer, Cole said, voice low and steady. The sheriff glanced between them. You two know each other? Daniel nodded once. We served together. Cole gave a faint, humorless smile. That's one way to put it. Silence settled like fog around the lake. The water behind them barely moved, reflecting a sky without stars. What do you want, Cole? Daniel asked. To talk, he replied. Privately. The sheriff shifted his weight. Not happening without me present. Cole raised his hand slightly. Relax, Sheriff. I'm not here to start trouble in your quiet little town. Daniel studied him carefully. Years ago, Cole had been the loudest voice in their unit, the kind of man who thrived on chaos. Seeing him here, standing on peaceful gravel roads instead of desert dust, felt wrong. What's in the letter? Cole asked. Daniel didn't answer. Cole exhaled slowly. I figured you hadn't opened it yet. You always needed time before facing things head-on. Daniel's gaze hardened slightly. Say what you came to say. Cole stepped closer, lowering his voice. They reopened the file. The words landed heavily between them. The sheriff frowned. What file? Daniel didn't respond. His eyes stayed locked on Cole. They think someone talked, Cole continued. Someone who knows what really happened that day. Wind swept across the lake, rustling the trees. For a moment, no one moved. I left that life behind, Daniel said quietly. Maybe, Cole replied. But the past doesn't respect boundaries. The sheriff crossed his arms. You're speaking in circles. If there's danger to this town, I need to know. Cole glanced at him briefly, then back at Daniel. There's no danger to your people. Not unless someone forces the truth out the wrong way. Daniel felt the weight of the dog tag in his pocket, the cold metal pressing against his palm. "What do you want from me?" he asked. "Closure," Cole said simply. "Same as you." A distant rumble of thunder echoed through the hills. The sheriff stepped forward. "All right, that's enough for tonight. Whatever history you two share, you're not settling it on my lake road." Cole nodded slowly, backing toward his truck. "I'll be staying in town for a few days," he said to Daniel. "You know where to find me." The engine growled to life, headlights sweeping across Daniel's face before disappearing into the darkness. The sheriff watched the taillights fade. "You going to explain what that was?" Daniel stared at the empty road, an old chapter trying to reopen. They walked back toward the patrol car in silence. The night felt heavier now, as if Alder Ridge itself sensed the change. Back at the house, Daniel placed the dog tag on the table beside the letter. He read the final line again, over and over. "You were never meant to carry it alone." His reflection in the window looked unfamiliar. Not the quiet mechanic the town had grown used to, but someone shaped by decisions made far from home. Outside, rain began to fall again. Daniel turned off the light and sat in the dark, listening to the storm. Memories pressed at the edges of his mind, voices over radios, the weight of responsibility, the moment that had changed everything. He had returned to Alder Ridge, hoping silence would be enough. But now, with Cole back and the past knocking louder than ever, he understood something he had tried to avoid for years. The story wasn't finished, and whatever truth waited at the center of it was getting closer with every passing hour. Rain fell steady through the night, tapping against the roof like quiet fingers refusing to leave. Daniel didn't sleep much. The letter stayed open on the table, its edges curling slightly from the humidity drifting in through the cracked window. By dawn, Alder Ridge looked washed clean, roads dark, trees dripping, lake calm again as if nothing had shifted beneath the surface. But Daniel felt it. Something had changed. At the mechanic shop, Hank noticed the silence first. Daniel worked as usual, movements precise, tools returned to their places without sound. Yet his eyes followed every passing vehicle, every unfamiliar engine tone rolling down the street. "You're different today," Hank said while checking an invoice. Daniel tightened a bolt. "Everyone changes eventually." "That's not what I meant." Hank leaned against the counter. "Feels like you're waiting for a storm that already started." Daniel didn't answer. Mid-morning, Claire Donovan arrived again, coffee in one hand, curiosity written across her face. "Cole Bennett checked into the motel last night," she said quietly. "Didn't even try to stay hidden." Daniel nodded slightly. "He told the clerk he was here for unfinished business," she added. "You want to tell me what that means?" Daniel wiped his hands slowly, buying himself a moment before speaking. "It means the past doesn't disappear just because you stop talking about it." Claire studied him carefully. "You think he's dangerous?" "No," Daniel replied, "but the truth he carries might be." Before she could ask more, Ethan burst into the shop, breathless. "Mr. Mercer, there's a guy at the diner asking about you again," he said. "Not the tall one from last night, someone else." Daniel's gaze shifted toward Claire. "How many people from your past are planning to visit our town?" she asked softly. "Hopefully, not many," he said. They walked toward the diner together, rainwater pooling in shallow cracks along the sidewalk. Inside, the familiar smell of coffee and fried eggs filled the air. Conversations quieted slightly as Daniel entered, not out of fear, but curiosity. At a corner booth sat a man in a dark jacket, older than Cole, posture rigid. He looked up slowly when Daniel approached. "Mercer," the stranger said, "you took your time." Daniel recognized him instantly. Captain Elias Ward, a name tied to decisions he had tried to leave behind. Claire stayed a few steps back, watching closely. "What do you want, Captain?" Daniel asked. Ward gestured toward the empty seat across from him. "Just talk." Daniel didn't sit. "Say it here," Ward sighed. "They reopened the operation file. People higher up want answers. They think someone altered the official report years ago." Daniel's jaw tightened. "You were the last one with authority to make changes," Ward continued. "And now Bennett shows up. Let us start moving again. It doesn't look good." A low murmur spread through the diner, though no one fully understood the conversation. "I did what needed to be done," Daniel said quietly. Ward leaned forward. "Maybe. But the truth isn't staying buried. And if it comes out wrong, they'll paint you as the one who failed." Claire stepped closer. "Failed at what?" Ward glanced at her but didn't answer. Instead, he focused on Daniel. "You can still set the record straight, before someone else tells the story for you." Daniel's gaze drifted toward the window, where rain traced thin lines down the glass. Outside, Alder Ridge continued its slow, ordinary rhythm. People walking dogs, trucks passing, children laughing in the distance. Normal life. The kind he had tried to protect by staying silent. "I'm not here to defend myself," Daniel said finally. Ward shook his head. "You always carried more than your share. That's why they're coming now." "They?" Claire asked. Ward hesitated. "Investigators. Maybe more. Depends how this unfolds." Daniel felt the weight of the dog tag in his pocket again, a reminder of a choice that had never stopped echoing. "What happens if I stay silent?" he asked. Ward's voice softened. "Then someone else decides who you were." The words lingered long after he left the diner. Outside, Claire turned to Daniel. "You keep saying the past isn't finished with you, but it sounds like you're the only one still trying to keep it quiet." Daniel walked toward the lake road without answering. Ethan followed a few steps behind, pushing his bike slowly. "You're not in trouble, are you?" the boy asked. Daniel stopped, kneeling slightly so they were eye level. "Sometimes adults carry things they don't know how to explain," he said. "That doesn't mean they're bad." Ethan nodded, though uncertainty stayed in his eyes. By evening, heavy clouds rolled over Alder Ridge again. Daniel stood alone near the water, watching reflections ripple across the surface. Every encounter that day, Cole, Ward, the letter, pulled him closer to a truth he had avoided for years. He thought silence would protect everyone. Now he wasn't sure. Behind him, footsteps approached. Claire stopped beside him, hands tucked into her jacket. "You don't have to tell me everything," she said. "But I can see you're carrying something heavy." Daniel watched the lake. "Some truths don't belong to one person." "Maybe," she replied, "but hiding them doesn't make them lighter." He didn't respond. The wind picked up, pushing waves gently toward the shore. Somewhere in town, a siren sounded faintly, echoing through the hills. Daniel closed his eyes for a moment, letting the sound fade. For the first time since returning home, he felt the edges of his quiet life beginning to crack, not from violence or chaos, but from the slow pressure of unfinished truth pressing upward. And deep down, he knew the next step wouldn't be about running from the past. It would be about deciding who finally got to hear it. The rain stopped sometime before dawn, leaving Alder Ridge wrapped in a fragile stillness. Daniel stood on his porch, coffee in hand, watching fog lift slowly from the lake. Every sound felt sharper. A truck shifting gears, a dog barking in the distance, the soft creak of trees swaying under leftover wind. He had spent most of the night reading the letter again, not because it revealed everything, but because of what it didn't say. At the mechanic shop, Hank greeted him with a quiet nod. "Town feels different today," he said. "Like everyone's waiting for news they don't understand." Daniel set his tools down. Sometimes silence spreads faster than rumors. Hank watched him carefully. "You planning on leaving again?" Daniel hesitated. No. It was the most certain answer he had given since returning to Alder Ridge. Mid-morning brought another visitor. Not Cole, not Claire, but a woman Daniel hadn't seen in years. Her hair was shorter now, streaked with gray, but her posture remained unmistakably calm. "Lena," he said quietly. She stepped inside the shop, eyes scanning the room before resting on him. "You look peaceful," she said, though the word carried doubt. "You weren't supposed to come here," Daniel replied. "I wasn't planning to," she admitted. "But when the file reopened, I knew they'd come for you first." Hank pretended to organize a shelf nearby, though he clearly listened. "What do you want?" Daniel asked. Lena's gaze softened. "To make sure you don't face this alone again." He shook his head slightly. "It's not your burden. It never was just yours," she said quietly. Claire arrived moments later, surprised to see another stranger standing beside Daniel. The tension between past and present filled the small space. Lena glanced at Claire. "You must be the one asking questions." Claire crossed her arms. "Someone has to." Lena nodded slowly. "Then ask him why he never corrected the report. Ask him why he chose silence instead of recognition." Daniel's jaw tightened. "I didn't come here for this," he said. "But it's happening anyway," Lena replied gently. Outside, thunder rolled again, distant but steady. By afternoon, word had spread through Alder Ridge that people from Daniel's past were arriving one by one. Conversations at the diner lowered when he entered. Neighbors watched from porches, curiosity mixing with concern. Daniel walked toward the lake alone, needing space to think. The water lay darker today, clouds reflecting like shifting shadows. He remembered the moment years ago when everything changed. A decision made in seconds, a responsibility no one else wanted to carry. He had believed silence would protect everyone involved. Now it felt like a wall closing in. Footsteps approached behind him. Cole Bennett stopped a few feet away, hands in his jacket pockets. "Ward talked to you?" Cole said. Daniel nodded. "And Lena showed up too," Cole added, almost amused. "Looks like the whole past is lining up." Daniel didn't turn. "Why now?" Cole watched the water. "Because someone finally asked the right questions." Silence stretched between them. "You know they'll twist it," Cole continued. "They always do, unless you speak first." Daniel picked up a small stone and tossed it into the lake, watching ripples spread outward. "I didn't come back here to relive it." "No," Cole said softly. "You came back because it's the only place that still feels honest." Daniel glanced at him briefly. "You're not wrong." As evening approached, storm clouds gathered thicker over Alder Ridge. Wind pushed across the water, carrying the smell of rain again. Back at the house, Daniel sat at the table with Lena and Claire. The letter lay open between them, though most of its meaning stayed unspoken. "What happened back then?" Claire asked quietly. Daniel stared at the words for a long moment. "There was a mission," he said slowly. "Something went wrong. Decisions had to be made fast. Afterward, someone needed to carry the responsibility." "And you volunteered?" she asked. He shook his head. "No, I just didn't stop it." The room fell silent. Lena reached for the dog tag, turning it gently in her hand. "He thinks silence protects people," she said to Claire. "But sometimes it protects the wrong version of the story." Claire looked at Daniel carefully. "Is that why you never told anyone here who you really were?" Daniel's voice lowered. "People see what they expect. A mechanic, a quiet neighbor. That was enough." Outside, headlights passed slowly along the road, then stopped near the edge of the property. 3 dark vehicles. Daniel stood immediately, instinct returning like muscle memory. Claire moved to the window. "That doesn't look like casual visitors." Lena exhaled quietly. "They found you." Daniel stepped onto the porch as doors opened and figures approached under the fading light. Not aggressive, but official, purposeful. One of them stepped forward. "Daniel Mercer?" the man asked, holding out identification. "We need to speak with you regarding a reopened military investigation." The air felt colder suddenly. Daniel nodded once, calm but resolute. "I figured this day would come." He glanced back toward the house, toward Lena and Claire, toward the life he had tried to keep simple. Then he stepped down from the porch to meet the past face to face. The gravel shifted under Daniel's boots as he walked toward the 3 vehicles. The men waiting near the road stood with quiet authority. Not aggressive, but unmistakably official. Rain threatened again, clouds heavy above Alder Ridge, pressing the air into a tense stillness. "Daniel Mercer?" the lead investigator repeated, holding a folder against his chest. Daniel nodded once. "That's me. My name is Agent Russell. We're here regarding Operation Grey Lantern," he said. The name alone felt like a door opening somewhere deep in Daniel's memory. "The file has been reopened. We'd like to ask a few questions." Behind Daniel, Lena stepped onto the porch, arms folded tightly. Claire stood near the window, watching everything unfold with careful attention. "This isn't the place," Daniel said calmly. Agent Russell glanced around at the quiet houses, the lake stretching beyond the trees. "We're not here to disrupt your town, just to understand what happened and why the official report doesn't match the testimony we've recently received." Daniel's gaze drifted briefly toward the water before returning to the agent. "You'll get your answers, but not in front of everyone." The agent nodded. "Fair enough." They moved toward the small community hall near the lake, neutral ground, quiet enough to keep curious neighbors at a distance. The sheriff arrived moments later, leaning against the doorway with a watchful expression. Inside, the room smelled faintly of old wood and coffee. Folding chairs lined one wall. A faded American flag hung near the stage. Agent Russell opened the folder slowly. Years ago, during Grey Lantern, a convoy came under unexpected fire. Official reports state that a tactical delay resulted in the loss of a civilian asset. However, new statements suggest someone altered the timeline. Daniel stood still, hands at his sides. "You were the one who signed off on the final report," the agent continued. "Why?" Silence filled the hall. Daniel's voice remained steady. "Because someone needed to carry the decision." "That's not an explanation," Russell said gently. "It's the truth." Outside, thunder rolled closer. Claire watched from the doorway, absorbing every word. Cole Bennett leaned against the wall behind her, eyes fixed on Daniel with a mixture of respect and frustration. "You're still doing it," Cole muttered. "Still protecting everyone but yourself." Daniel ignored the comment. Agent Russell placed a photograph on the table, a younger Daniel standing beside two other soldiers, dust swirling around them. One face had been blurred by time. "According to recent testimony," Russell said, "you weren't responsible for the delay. Someone else gave the order." Daniel's jaw tightened. "That's not relevant now." "It is, if the record is wrong." Lena stepped forward quietly. "He chose to sign the report because the alternative would have destroyed more lives than it saved," she said. Russell looked at her. "And you are someone who was there," she replied simply. The room fell silent again. Daniel finally spoke. "I signed it because the mission was already broken. Blame wouldn't bring anyone back. It would only create more ghosts." Russell studied him carefully. "And what about the truth?" Daniel's eyes moved toward the window, where rain began to fall in slow, steady drops. "Truth isn't always about clearing your name," he said softly. "Sometimes it's about letting others keep theirs." Claire felt the weight of those words settle heavily in the room. Cole stepped forward, unable to stay silent any longer. "He's still protecting the captain who made the call," he said. "Ward froze that day. Mercer took the fall so the rest of us could go home without carrying it." Daniel turned sharply. "Enough!" But the silence had already broken. Agent Russell's expression shifted slightly, not accusatory, but understanding. "So the report was altered to shield someone else." Daniel didn't confirm it, yet he didn't deny it either. Outside, lightning flashed across the lake, illuminating the hall in brief silver light. The agent closed the folder slowly. "We're not here to punish you," he said. "We're here to understand why a man would carry a story that wasn't fully his." Daniel exhaled quietly. "Because sometimes leadership means standing where the blame lands." The words lingered in the air long after he finished speaking. Claire stepped closer, her voice softer now. "And what about you? What happens to the man who carries it for years?" Daniel didn't answer. For a long moment, the only sound was rain against the roof, steady, relentless, like time itself pressing forward. Agent Russell finally nodded. "We'll need a formal statement," he said, "but tonight I think we learned more than the file ever showed." As everyone began to move toward the door, Daniel remained standing near the table, eyes fixed on the old photograph. The past had finally spoken. Not loudly, not dramatically, but enough to change the way everyone in that room saw him. And yet, deep inside, Daniel knew the real turning point hadn't arrived yet. Something still waited beyond the storm. The storm settled over Alder Ridge with quiet determination, rain sliding down the windows of the community hall as people slowly drifted outside. Daniel remained near the table long after the others had stepped into the night air. The photograph still lay there, a younger version of himself, staring back with eyes that hadn't yet learned how heavy silence could become. Agent Russell paused at the doorway. "You don't look relieved," he said gently. Daniel didn't move. "Relief comes when the story ends," he replied, "not when it starts being told." Outside, Claire stood under the awning with Lena and the sheriff, watching headlights reflect across the wet pavement. Cole leaned against a nearby truck, arms crossed, gaze fixed on the dark lake beyond the trees. "You think he'll finally say everything?" Claire asked Lena. Lena shook her head slowly. "Daniel doesn't speak to defend himself. He speaks when it protects someone else." The sheriff glanced toward the hall door. "Strange kind of strength." "Not strange," Lena said quietly. "Just rare." Daniel stepped out moments later, rain catching on his jacket. The air felt colder now, but clearer, as if the storm had washed away part of the weight he carried. Agent Russell approached him one last time. "We'll leave town tomorrow," he said. "Your statement tonight changed the direction of the investigation. Some truths take years to reach the surface." Daniel nodded once. "Take care of the people still inside the story." Russell gave a respectful nod and walked away. The crowd dispersed slowly. Alder Ridge returned to its familiar quiet, distant porch lights glowing, wind brushing through trees, the lake reflecting fragments of lightning far off in the mountains. Claire stepped closer. "You didn't defend yourself," she said softly. "I didn't come here to win an argument," Daniel replied. "Then why did you come back to this town at all?" He looked toward the water, eyes steady. "Because this is where my life started, before everything else." They walked together along the edge of the lake, gravel crunching under their feet. For a moment, neither spoke. "I used to think silence meant strength," Claire said eventually. "Now, I'm not so sure." Daniel considered her words. "Silence isn't strength by itself," he said. "It's just space. What you carry inside it, that's what matters." Back at his house, the metal box sat open on the table. The dog tag rested beside the folded uniform, the silver medal catching faint light from the window. Daniel picked it up slowly, not with pride, but with acceptance. For years he had kept it hidden, believing recognition wasn't meant for him. Tonight felt different. A soft knock came at the door. Ethan stood outside, soaked from the rain, holding a small flashlight. "My mom said you were at the hall," he said. "Everyone's talking about you." Daniel gave a small nod. "People talk." The boy hesitated. "They say you did something brave." Daniel crouched slightly so they were eye level. "Brave isn't always loud," he said gently. "Sometimes it just means standing still when things get hard." Ethan nodded slowly, as if storing the words for later. When the boy left, Daniel sat on the porch alone, listening to rain fade into a steady whisper. For the first time since returning to Alder Ridge, he allowed himself to breathe without feeling like he was hiding. Inside, Lena and Claire spoke quietly at the table, voices low but calm. The house no longer felt like a place of refuge from the past. It felt like a place where the past could finally rest. Cole arrived shortly after midnight, parking at the end of the road instead of pulling into the driveway. He walked up slowly, hands empty. "You did it," he said simply. Daniel looked at him. "I told enough of the truth." Cole nodded. "Ward will have to answer for his part now." "That was never my goal," Daniel replied. "I know," Cole said. "That's why you're still standing." They watched the lake together, old tension replaced by something quieter, understanding, maybe even forgiveness. "Think you'll stay here?" Cole asked. Daniel didn't answer right away. He listened to the wind moving through the trees, the distant hum of a passing car, the soft rhythm of water against the shore. "Yes," he said finally, "I think I will." Cole smiled faintly. "Then maybe this town isn't just where you hid. Maybe it's where you healed." Daniel didn't respond, but the silence between them felt lighter than it had in years. As dawn approached, the storm moved beyond the mountains, leaving Alder Ridge under a pale silver sky. Lights turned off one by one across the town. Another day began, ordinary, quiet, unchanged on the surface. Yet something inside Daniel had shifted. For the first time, he wasn't just waiting for the past to catch up. He was ready to let it end. Morning arrived with a kind of calm Alder Ridge hadn't felt in days. The storm had passed, leaving the sky pale and clear, sunlight slipping across the lake like a quiet promise. Daniel woke early, not from tension this time, but from habit, the steady rhythm of a life rebuilt piece by piece. The metal box remained open on the table. For years he had kept it closed, treating the past like something fragile that might break if exposed too long to daylight. Now the uniform rested neatly folded beside the dog tag, no longer hidden, not displayed proudly, just present, part of the room like everything else. At the mechanic shop, Hank handed him a cup of coffee without saying a word. The town moved differently around Daniel that morning. People nodded a little longer. Conversations paused, not out of gossip, but respect they didn't quite know how to express. "You're famous now," Hank muttered with a half smile. Daniel shook his head. "Nothing changed." "Maybe not for you," Hank replied, "but people see you clearer." Daniel didn't respond. He never worked for recognition. Still, he couldn't deny the weight inside him felt lighter, not gone, just easier to carry. Claire arrived near noon, notebook tucked under her arm. She looked less like an investigator now and more like someone who had decided to stay a while longer. "Agent Russell called," she said. "They're adjusting the report. Your statement shifted everything." Daniel tightened a bolt slowly. "Good. That's it?" she asked, almost amused. "No relief? No anger?" He set the wrench down carefully. "Relief comes from knowing the truth exists, not from watching it travel." Claire studied him quietly, realizing that for Daniel, closure didn't look dramatic. It looked like returning to work, fixing engines, helping a kid with a broken bike, choosing normal life over recognition. That afternoon, Ethan arrived again, this time with a small wooden box in his hands. "My mum said I should give this to you," he said shyly. Inside lay a simple patch sewn onto fabric, a faded emblem from an old military unit. Daniel recognized it instantly. "She found it in our attic," Ethan explained. "Said it belonged to your dad." Daniel ran his thumb over the stitching, memories of childhood flickering softly. His father standing by the lake, early mornings filled with quiet lessons about patience, honesty, and the weight of responsibility. "Thank you," he said gently. The boy grinned. "Are you going to stay here now?" Daniel looked toward the mountains. "Yes." Evening settled slowly over Alder Ridge. Lights flickered on across porches. The diner filled with soft music and low conversation. Daniel sat at a corner table with Lena and Claire, the first time he allowed himself to share space without feeling like an outsider. "You know," Lena said, "you could finally let yourself be known here." Daniel considered her words. "Being known isn't the goal," he replied. "Living honestly is." Claire smiled faintly. That might be the most Mercer answer possible. Outside, Cole leaned against his truck, preparing to leave town. He walked in briefly, nodding at Daniel. "Looks like you're staying," he said. Daniel nodded. "Good," Cole added. "Some of us never found a place that felt quiet again." They shook hands, not as soldiers, not as men tied to old missions, but as people finally stepping into different lives. Night came gently. Daniel returned home, stepping onto the porch as the lake reflected the last colors of sunset. He placed the old unit patch beside the medal inside the metal box, then paused and left the lid open. The past no longer felt like something that needed to stay hidden. Wind moved softly through the trees. Somewhere in town, laughter echoed faintly. Ordinary sounds. Real sounds. For years, Daniel had believed silence meant carrying everything alone. Now it felt more like space. Space for healing, for connection, for a life that didn't revolve around what he once lost. He sat on the porch, watching the stars appear one by one. And for the first time since returning to Alder Ridge, he felt something unfamiliar settle quietly in his chest. Peace. The lake was still when the final morning arrived. Daniel sat on the porch steps with a mug of coffee, cooling slowly in his hands. Alder Ridge moved at its usual pace, a truck passing on the gravel road, a neighbor waving from across the fence, birds crossing the pale sky in loose formation. Nothing about the town felt extraordinary, And maybe that was the point. For years he had searched for quiet. Not the absence of noise, but the kind of quiet that didn't feel like hiding. The investigation vehicles were gone. Cole had left before sunrise. Lena packed her bag later that morning, standing at the doorway with a softness in her eyes Daniel hadn't seen in a long time. "You're different," she said. "I feel lighter," he admitted. "That's because you finally let part of the story breathe," she replied gently. "You didn't carry it alone this time." He nodded once. No dramatic farewell, just a quiet understanding between two people who had shared years that words couldn't fully explain. At the mechanic shop, Hank greeted him with a clap on the shoulder. "Back to normal?" he asked. Daniel picked up a wrench. "As normal as it gets." Customers came and went, but something subtle had changed. People spoke to him with a different tone. Not louder, not overly respectful, just more honest. They no longer saw only the quiet mechanic. They saw a man who had chosen to stay when leaving would have been easier. Late afternoon sunlight stretched across the lake, turning the water gold. Ethan rode past on his bike, stopping briefly. "My teacher asked us to write about someone strong," the boy said. "I picked you." Daniel smiled faintly. "Strength isn't always visible. That's why I picked you," Ethan replied before riding off again. The words lingered longer than Daniel expected. That evening, Claire joined him on the porch. She held a small notebook, but didn't open it. "You know," she said, "most stories end with a big speech or some kind of celebration." Daniel watched the horizon fade into shades of blue. "Life doesn't work like that." She leaned back against the railing. "What happens now?" He thought about the question, about the years behind him and the quiet road ahead. "Now I keep living," he said simply. "Fix engines, walk by the lake, help where I can." Claire nodded slowly. "No grand plan." He shook his head. "Peace doesn't need one." Silence settled between them, comfortable and steady. As darkness arrived, Daniel stepped inside and looked at the metal box one last time. The uniform, the medal, the dog tag. Pieces of a life that had shaped him but no longer defined every step he took. He closed the lid gently, not to hide it, but to place it where it belonged. Part of the past, not the weight of the present. Outside, the stars reflected across the water like scattered memories. Softer now, less sharp. Daniel sat on the porch until the town fell quiet, listening to the wind move through the trees. He had spent years believing strength meant carrying everything alone, but Alder Ridge had taught him something different. Strength could also mean staying. Staying when running felt easier, staying when silence turned into understanding, staying long enough for the truth to settle without needing applause. The night deepened. Somewhere in the distance, a porch light turned off. Another followed. The lake returned to its familiar stillness, holding reflections without judgment. Daniel Mercer closed his eyes for a moment, breathing in the calm he had once thought impossible. And for the first time in years, the silence around him didn't feel heavy. It felt like home.